So as you heard, I have a book out called Geek Heresy, and ever since, by the way, you can buy a copy upstairs, it looks like. Ever since it's come out, I always feel like I have to start talks by establishing my geek credentials. And so this is how I'm going to do it today. In 1986, the great science fiction author, Isaac Asimov, wrote this book, Foundation and Earth, in which he weaved together the strands of many of his different novels over the years. And in this book, the year is 25,066. Human beings have colonized the galaxy, but the galactic empire is crumbling. And in its place, there are two forces that are vying for power. One of them is a kind of mysterious elite whose manipulative powers a lot of people can't quite trust. And the other is a business-savvy upstart that claims that it's going to be able to bring back stability and prosperity in short order and make the universe great again. So in other words, 23,000 years into the future, not much will have changed. But anyway, in this book, it turns out that there's a third alternative, which I'm not going to tell you about. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But I will say that one of the revelations in the book is that throughout the galactic history, there's this one humanoid robot whose name is R. Daniel Olivaw that has been subtly and gently influencing human events in such a way to avoid chaos and catastrophe and conflict, which tends to be what human beings apparently really want to do. Now, among Asimov fans, Daniel is arguably one of the most popular characters, and it's easy to see why. He has godlike powers, he's basically immortal, he has the abilities of mind control and mind reading, he is super intelligent, but he uses all of his power for the sake of serving humankind. And in this book, he basically does this one last time. So given that there's so much science fiction out there that is actually dystopian in nature, that tends to see technology as a corrupting force, the question is, why is it that in Asimov's universe that Daniel in particular is a force for good? So to understand that, it turns out that you have to go back through 23,000 years of Asimov's timeline to one of the first stories that he wrote when he was just 22 years old. And in that story, he basically outlines what he calls the 3 laws of robotics. The first law is up here, as you can see, and it is that a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. The second and third laws basically say that robots must also obey human beings and protect themselves, except where it conflicts with the first law. In another story, Daniel and another robot co-formulate something they call the 0th law, which ends up preceding these, which is that a robot may not harm humanity or through inaction allow humanity to come to harm. And because this happened so early in the timeline of robotic history in Asimov's universe, every robot that's ever built has these laws burnt into its hardware, so much so that if they even think about violating any of the laws, they end up beginning a shutdown process. So it's quite clear why Daniel is such an amazing robot and why he's constantly serving humanity. Now, Asimov was prescient. He placed the beginning of his robotic history in the early 21st century, which is, of course, where we are today. And today, we have all kinds of robots that are increasingly appearing on the scene. But one thing that's different for these robots is that they are not, there's nothing like a law of robotics that we have for all these robots. In fact, if anything, these robots are largely serving some large corporations' desire to increase shareholder value. Now, shareholder value is great if you're a shareholder, but of course, those shareholders are a small minority of the rest of the people on the planet. And what's interesting, I think, is that this is a question not about just robots in general, but it's a larger question about how we think about technology and society and how the powers of technology need to be harnessed in a way that benefits all of us. So I'm a computer scientist by training. I used to do research in an area called computer vision, which is an offshoot of artificial intelligence that looks primarily at processing images. Some of my work was a foundation for Microsoft's Kinect system. But 12 years ago, as you heard from Micha, I went to India to look for ways in which digital technologies could be applied to all kinds of problems that have to do with socioeconomic development. Some of them having to do with politics and governance and democracy. And after 50-odd projects, I came to the disappointing conclusion, disappointing for me as a computer scientist, that no matter how cleverly you design the technology by itself doesn't fundamentally cause politics or democracy or governance to make progress. And over the years, I've heard all kinds of feedback on this point. And what I want to get into for the next few slides is basically why this is the case. It's important to understand why this might be, because without having some framework about thinking about these ideas, it's very easy to make glib statements about technology, and some of our most prominent leaders do that. So for example, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, instated a foreign policy called internet freedom, in which she based the idea on this idea that access to information helps citizens hold their own governments accountable. But is this really true? I'm going to suggest that all of us have intuition that conflicts with this basic idea. So for example, in which of the following 4 countries do you believe that democratic free speech is most available online? Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to raise their hands. So who thinks A, North Korea? Anybody? No. B, China. C, Russia. Or D, the United States. Okay, most hands went up for the United States, and of course, you are correct. This is not a trick question. So the question is, why is this true? So this is my favorite photograph of the internet in North Korea. In North Korea, it turns out they have their own parallel internet called Kwangmyong, which uses the same technical protocols as the internet everywhere else in the world, but is completely disconnected from it. So if you live in Pyongyang and have access to the internet, you cannot access Google or Facebook or any of the platforms that we're normally on, although you probably have access to the North Korean versions of those sites. And you can be pretty sure that nobody in North Korea is criticizing online the supreme leader. In China, there are something like 300,000 paid censors who basically remove anything from social media that is objectionable to the Communist Party, and they do it within 24 hours. In Russia, the government hires an army of trolls who pose as regular citizens, but then post things that are basically government propaganda. And what all of these stories tell you is that not that the internet, when you take it somewhere, brings democratization, but rather the internet effectively reflects and amplifies the underlying political situation that is in that country to begin with. In America, we have free speech online because we have free speech offline, not the other way around. Next, let's consider inequality. So here's Mark Zuckerberg saying that the richest 500 million people have way more money than the next 6 billion combined. You solve that by getting everyone online. Now, this might seem like an exaggerated version of what some of us believe, but I have to admit that in the early part of my career, I believed something along these lines, so perhaps not as dramatic. But again, I would say that all of us have intuition that suggests this isn't quite true. So imagine that you and a very poor homeless person who's involuntarily poor are both asked to try to raise as much money for the political party of your choice, and you get to do this by using 1 week's worth of free, unlimited, high bandwidth internet. Okay, who believes that the homeless person would be able to outraise funds compared to you? Anybody? All right, and who believes that you'd be able to do this better? Again, most hands went up for a second answer, and of course, this is also not a trick question. It's clear that you have richer friends, that you have a better capacity to organize, and you probably have a better ability to use those tools on the internet. And so it's who you know and what you know that makes a difference in the outcome, not the technology itself. Now you can change the technology to whatever you want. Maybe it's even brain-to-brain transmitters that we might have in the future. You can change the task so that it's not raising funds but doing something else. You could change who you're playing this against, maybe Bill Gates or Bill Clinton. And the result will always be the same, which is to say whoever comes in with more advantages leaves being able to better take advantage of the technology. You can see this at a large scale by looking at this graph. So here is a graph of the rate of poverty. The bottom green line is the rate of poverty in the United States, which declined from about 1940 to 1970. But since the 1970s has basically stayed flat. It's gone up a little bit since the recent recession. During the last 40 years, we've also seen, of course, an explosion of digital technologies. Now, if in a golden age of innovation, there's no change in the rate of poverty, and there's, in fact, if anything, inequality is increasing, then you have to question any idea that the technology by itself is causing positive social change. In fact, it's very clear that you need something other than the technology also to make that difference. And the same, of course, is true for political polarization as well, as we've been seeing recently. So how do you explain all these things? How do you explain that, on the one hand, here's this great tool that empowers all of us as individuals, but it still doesn't seem to serve the common good? The way I explain it is by saying that technology amplifies underlying human forces. And what that means is that for those of us who have the right kind of education, who have good social influence, who have the wealth that we need to make the things happen that we want to, the internet is fantastic. The technological tools are great. But those of us without those advantages cannot make those same things happen. And so there's a disparity in what we can do with the same technology. Amplification also explains why the same social media that kind of helps bring some of us closer together actually pulls many of us also further apart. Now, amplification is an interesting as a theory, not just because it explains actual phenomena, but also because it provides us with guidelines for what we should be doing. So for example, if you're a technologist and you really want to have some kind of positive political impact, the best advice I have based on this theory is basically that you should find organizations or social forces that are already having positive impact and then work with them so that you can find a way to amplify that impact with technology. Conversely, what this means is that spreading technology in and of itself, hoping for some viral app to change the way the political landscape in the United States or elsewhere in the world is not fundamentally effective. It's not the technology by itself that does it. And finally, I want to mention that if you believe in amplification, it also means that we have to be very vigilant about entities that have control over very powerful technologies. So I would say that we are in the dawn of super intelligent machines. Some of these technologies will be like atomic bombs compared to the, basically the plastic toy guns that we think of as digital technology today. And these technologies are going to be in the hands of very large private corporations, as opposed to with, let's say, the government that so far has used atomic weapons in a largely responsible way that is accountable to the public. Private corporations don't have that, and so we have to make sure that there is regulation that is accountable to the public that ultimately ensures that those powerful tools are used for humanity's good overall. And I want to mention that this is not something that is further out. It's actually something that's surprisingly close. So to draw on another science fiction example, in the movie The Matrix, there was an advanced technology that harvests human energy to feed its machine masters, all the while serving all of us an illusion of a pleasant life. Well, Facebook is an advanced technology that harvests human attention to feed its shareholders while serving all of us a pleasant social life. Now, I don't mean to pick on Facebook by itself because it just serves as a convenient example, but basically every large corporation is doing some version of this. And it's easy to be seduced because their products are so great. I mean, I'm absolutely a fan of Facebook as a user, but there's something about these tools that is also eroding our culture and what we get out of the system as citizens. And we have to be vigilant, and we have to find ways to put regulation so that there's a limit to corporate power. So finally, I just want to mention that technology by itself does not enhance governance or democracy. Instead, it actually amplifies whatever situation is already there. And so that means that the critical things that we should all be focusing on are the underlying human foundation. So especially in a world of powerful technologies, we have to worry even more about whether the right human politics is in place. Thank you.